this is your first time with us. So first and foremost, I want to put out a legal disclaimer, as we do have a couple of attorneys with us today. But the information shared during this GovCon live show, including the Q&A session, is for general information purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. For specific legal advice to your situation, we strongly recommend consulting a qualified attorney specializing in federal contracting law. And if you're looking for an attorney specializing in contracting law, we like to give a plug to our partners at Prince McCall Potroffs LLC, who do provide these legal solutions for government contractors. We've got phone numbers and an email address there for them. We'll bring the contact information up back again when we get into the Q&A section here. But before we move any further, I would like to welcome our special guest today, one of the equity partners from Prince McCall Potroff LLC, Mr. Shane McCall. So Shane, welcome to the show today.
Hello, good to be here.
Yeah. Also, I just want to take a moment to say thank you to Shane and his team, not only for supporting this particular show, but also for showing up and doing many webinars on the Govology platform throughout the year, including the really popular end of the year recap that we typically do. So it's always a pleasure to have you guys with us, Shane.
Oh yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah. So our show format for the day is that we are live here for 90 minutes. The first 30 to 60 minutes is going to be an interview type discussion where I'll be talking with Stephen Coprince and Shane McCall today about the topic that we have at hand for episode 10 of our GovCon Roundup live show, which I'll go over soon. And then we're going to cut to a 20 to 30 minute post-show Q&A where we'll be able to take any of the questions that you guys might have on the topic at hand today. There's a couple of ways that you can ask your questions when we get to that forum or throughout the session. Number one is to raise your hand. There's a control panel that you'll find, and there's going to be an option in there. You can do a little raise your hand button. If you do that, don't raise your hand now, but if you do that, I will see that, and we can unmute your mic, and you can ask your question live of either Stephen or Shane or myself today, and we'll take your questions that way. The other way that you can ask questions is that you can type your questions in the Q&A box. And if you don't happen to see the Q&A box in your control panel, just look under that more area and basically you'll be able to see it there. So we ask that you don't put your questions in the chat box. We do have a chat box. What you will use that chat box for is that if you have any audio difficulties or if you want to shoot a comment out there or if you have a resource, I'll put it on so everybody can share with everybody here. Feel free to post that there, but make sure you put your questions in the Q&A box because that's what I'm going to be looking at once we get into that live Q&A segment here at the end to relay the questions on to Stephen and to Shane. If you happen to need any help at any time before, during, or after a show, also support@govology.com is our main support email address. So you can always use that one to reach out to us, and we monitor it day and night, and we can get back to you ASAP. Also, you can find today's show if you want to watch the recording. We do publish this on our YouTube channel. You can go to govology.com/YouTube. And if you happen to want to listen to us on your ride to work or on your vacation with your family, you can catch us on Spotify. Just search for GovCon Roundup. I do want to make a mention if you happen to be watching this later online and you want to ask questions, we do have a few options for you. Number one is I encourage you to join our free private LinkedIn group, Govology Nation. We've got over 2,000 members there, including the experts that you're hearing from today. So if something pops up or if you're listening to this on demand, feel free to join us at Govology Nation. Post a question to the group and we can get your question answered that way. Also, we do again have contact information if you do want to reach out to a GovCon attorney. We have some information for the Prince McCall Potroff team. There's their email address there. And also, as a resource, as always, you can contact your local Apex accelerators. They also work a lot in the certification space and helping to provide some guidance in many different areas. And there's a link there directly to the Department of War website, which can help you find a Apex Accelerator located in your state or territory. A few more recommended free resources. Now, a lot of this GovCon Roundup live show is based on and inspired from the blog that Stephen writes on his FedLift Launchpad, as well as his GovCon Roundup that he had started. But we included a link to Stephen's Substack. I really highly encourage that you guys follow Stephen there. He continuously posts great updates and news throughout the year. Also, the smallgovcon.com blog is the legal blog that was once started by Stephen when he owned the firm, and then continued on by Shane and his team at Co-Prince McCall Potroff Small GovCon, another really great blog. And again, Shane, I'm grateful to both of you, Shane and Stephen, as well, for not only the work that you do to keep everybody informed, but also posting some of those articles within the Govology Nation platform for the members that are there, because we all need to stay up to date on what's happening. And so you guys both do a great job of that, and very grateful to you for that. Also, GovCon Roundup Live, the show that you're on here, we do this typically the third Wednesday of each month. Next month, we're going to be doing it 1 week early because there's an Apex conference that's going to be happening, I think, in that third week. But if you want to check out upcoming episodes, you can go to GovCon Roundup or govology.com/roundup. We're getting ready to post the August show here within the next week. But we'll also, if you're on our email list or following us on social channels, you'll see that as well. And next month, we'll be talking about some of the issues with the 8A and women-owned business programs and some of the things that are happening there. So we're looking forward to that. And again, just a last mention, there's the three folks we have on the show for today. And if you want to connect with any of us individually on LinkedIn, I also encourage you to do that, as I know that Stephen and Shane also does a lot of postings to their own LinkedIn accounts to help keep everybody up to date. All right. With that, let's jump into episode number 10. Today, we're going to be talking about expanding VOSB and SDVOSB opportunities and navigating the SBA certification minefield. So I'll pull the slides down here for a second, and let's jump in. So give me 1 second here to rearrange some things. All righty. All righty. So Stephen, let's begin with this major legislative update, which is the bipartisan Contract Our Veterans Act of 2026. So this proposed bill would establish a government-wide 5% contracting goal for veteran-owned small businesses and give contracting officers authority to set aside competitions and make sole source awards for VOSBs outside of the VA. So can you give us kind of the cliff notes on this bill, where it stands? What are the chances of it actually becoming law? And maybe before you go into that part, because we may have some new folks to GovCon here that doesn't understand really what the first part is with this environment of SDO, VOSB, and VOSB set-asides and goaling program. Maybe you can kind of give a little background on that and then kind of jump into the bill.
Yeah, no, it's a great place to start when we're talking about expanding veterans opportunities in federal contracting. And I think just as a refresher for some, or maybe new information for some, just depending on where you're coming from with your background in this topic. So right now, the federal government has a robust preference program for service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses. And those are companies that are owned and controlled by one or more veterans who are service disabled, who have a service-connected disability, and proof of that status. For veteran-owned small businesses, that is, companies that are owned and controlled by folks who are veterans of our armed forces but do not have a service-connected disability, the opportunities are much narrower. And so, unlike SDVOSBs, most federal agencies do not have a contracting preference program at the prime contract level for VOSBs. What they have For SDVOSBs, every agency or almost every agency is allowed to do set aside or and in some cases sole source contracts for SDVOSBs. And there's a 5% goal. There's a government wide goal for SDVOSBs of awarding at least 5% of federal prime contracting dollars to those companies. That's a lot. That's billions of dollars every year. The latest stats are out, and the government just met that goal last year, just by a hair. Is like 5.01%, but they awarded more than 5% of those federal prime contracting dollars to SDVOSBs. VOSBs are in a different place. If you served honorably, whether it was for just a few years or for 30 years, but you don't have a service-connected disability, then the only agency that currently has a prime contracting preference program for those companies for VOSBs is the VA. The VA does have statutory authority to issue set aside and sole source contracts to VOSBs. However, at the VA, the VOSBs still are at a disadvantage because there's an order of precedence at the VA where SDVOSBs are prioritized ahead of VOSBs. And so what that means in a lot of cases is that contract opportunities that could have been VOSB set-asides or VOSB sole source end up going out as an SDVOSB set aside or sole source because of those preferences that VA has. So bottom line is there's a big distinction in the opportunities that are available at the prime contracting level for a company that is veteran owned and veteran controlled, depending on whether the veteran or veterans in question have a service connected disabilities. This new bill is really the third time that Congress has attempted to address that in recent years. And so this bill is called the Contract Our Veterans Act of 2026. And it is a bill that has been introduced in both the House and Senate. And that's common that when there's a piece of significant legislation that House members and Senate members will talk and they'll introduce a version on each side of the chamber to see if one of them can get some traction. So it's been introduced on both sides. It's a bipartisan bill, has bipartisan support or co-sponsors from both parties. This bill would dramatically change the landscape for veteran-owned small businesses. What it would do, as you said, Carol, is it would create a government-wide preference program for veteran-owned small businesses. It would look a lot like the preference program for SDVOSBs currently. It would give every agency, not just VA, the opportunity to award set-aside or sole source contracts under certain circumstances to VOSBs, and it would create a 5% VOSB contracting goal. So it would essentially put VOSBs in a very similar place to what SDVOSBs currently enjoy in federal contracting. So this bill is currently in front of it's at the committee level in both the House and Senate. And if it were to move forward as a standalone bill, the next step would be to go through committee, then to the floor of the chamber, and then over to the other chamber. There is an alternate path that it could take to become law, and that's how it got close in the last couple of years. And that is to be wrapped into a bigger package, into an omnibus bill of sorts. And in the last 2 years, the Congress on the House side has actually passed something similar in its version of the annual defense authorization bill called the National Defense Authorization Act. And the House of Representatives, 2 years running, in its version of the NDAA, created a veteran-owned small business preference program those last 2 years would have been only for the Department of War, not for government-wide, but it was still an important step. However, the Senate did not agree to it in those 2 years, and so it never became law. So this is the third attempt, and And in my article on FedLift Launchpad, I wrote an article on this bill, and because I do this sort of thing, I cited Whitesnake saying, "Here we go again," because we're trying this for the third time. We'll see where it goes. I know there are a lot of veterans organizations and advocates out there who strongly support this, who say, hey, we got to do more for our veterans who served honorably, who gave so much of their lives to our country, but don't happen to have that service-connected disability. They should have some greater preferences. So we're keeping an eye on that bill right now, but right now in each chamber, it's still at the committee level.
Yeah, and so if we've got any veterans advocates groups out there or people that are, really wanting to do something to see this bill go through, right? I know you mentioned it would be probably better if it was wrapped into the National Defense Authorization Act, but right now it's not, correct?
Correct, at least in the versions I've seen. And so, the latest version of the Senate, as I understand it, is at the phase of the NDAA where there's an initial version that goes through committee, then it goes to the House or to the floor of the chamber, and then individual senators get to propose amendments. And last year, at least on the House side, this is how this got into the bill as an amendment that was proposed. Last I saw, there were like 800 some potential amendments to consider for this bill. So the story is not yet told. And it could go either way. It could get passed as a standalone bill. That sort of thing happens frequently too. It seems like to me like a pretty non-controversial bill. But we'll see. So it could go either way as an omnibus bill or standalone. I don't really care how it gets done, but I think I would love to see Congress move on this, and I know a lot of veterans out there would as well.
How would a advocate or somebody that's lobbying on behalf of veterans reach out to, I guess they would reach out to their congressional representatives to ask that they include it as a provision within the NDAA, since there's kind of like a higher priority on the NDAA than these separate individual bills? Is that what they would do?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of different things, and I'm no lobbyist. Let's see if Shane has any ideas on this too. So I will say that from that perspective, I can't give you any expert insights from a lobbying side. But yeah, there'd be a couple asks that you could make of your congressional representatives. One would be to simply co-sponsor the bill that's already been introduced that at least shows more support. And the more co-sponsors you can line up, the more the bill appears to have that sort of support. It seems like it should be, for a lot of folks, a pretty easy one to sign their name to. But if you really want to advance it, and this is the stage, then yeah, see if you can get that. And I don't know where we are in the process of the NDAA, whether new amendments can still be proposed at this point or whether that deadline is passed. But if it's possible to get an amendment into the NDAA, then that would be a great vehicle to do it. So again, I would have to ultimately defer to the professional lobbyists on that topic, though, because that is not my area of expertise.
Yeah. Now, the reason why I was talking about it so much is I know that we had a previous episode where I think, or maybe there was something that you posted on LinkedIn about one of the groups that were working towards some of the women-owned business programs had some success with getting it into the NDA, and that kind of now became, although there's some, we'll talk about that one next month, but Shane, let's go to you. What are your thoughts on kind of what's kind of happening within this environment right now? And kind of given this news, if you've got veterans that are coming to you in your practice right now saying, hey, what is it that we should be doing right now as, I guess, a veteran to, maybe get ahead or prepare if this does become an actual law? What should we be doing right now to prepare ourselves in advance of this?
Yeah, good question. I did want to make one observation, and I'm happy to get either of your thoughts on this. I did, when I was reviewing this act, it has this restricted competition language. It seems to say, and maybe I'm, not reading this right, that the contracting officer has to do a set aside for VOSBs if there's two or more small business concerns. That would sort of create kind of the VA rule of two, but extend that to all agencies. Am I reading that right? Because that would be a very large change and an increase in VOSB set-asides that's not even, currently present, except for the VA having those required set-asides. Wasn't sure if that language was only directed towards VA. It doesn't seem to be in the current version of the bill. So that would be potentially another impact that would be very even a greater impact perhaps than the goals, if having a required set aside for VOSBs, if it can be, kind of if same language similar to small business rule of two, if there's two or more VOSBs that will submit offers and they can do so at a reasonable price. It doesn't seem limited to any certain agencies or anything like that either. So that would definitely have a big impact as well. I don't know if Steve or Carol, you read it the same way? Just before I get to your other question,
I'm going to defer to Steven on that one.
Yeah, so my reading of it, and again, I agree that if that was how it's intended, then we've got a different beast, because now you're kind of creating a government-wide preference for VOSBs above everybody else, which I don't think is the intent here. My reading of it was in context, although this is a great question because the language is a little bit interesting on that point. What was that the contextual language was the restricted competition versus the sole source, and so that the shall in that case was saying if you've got two or more, you've got to do it as a competition as opposed to doing it as a sole source. At least that's how I read it, to say that it was like if you have two or more VOSBs and you're already decided to use this program, then you must do it as a competition as opposed to doing it as a sole source. That's how I read the shall being in there, but it's a great question.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Well, that maybe they will clean that up as it goes through committee. That's the sort of thing they could look at and figure out, is that the intent? Make that a little bit clearer. I would say though, if this is, since it's been introduced, multiple times, if it's getting sort of closer to becoming law, companies could certainly think about how they would position themselves for veteran-owned small business certification through the SBA's Vet Cert program.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know when you start that process, but you should start kind of thinking how you could position yourself, looking at the rules for that, looking at the regulations for that, looking at the application process, just as an idea to think, yeah, I could perhaps qualify for this. How would I do that? How early do I need to start that process? Right now, we've had the experience with SBA that their Vet Cert program that's certifying SDVOSB companies and VOSB companies is it works on a pretty efficient basis compared to it's faster, meaning it's than other types of programs within SBA. So, but if they're suddenly inundated with a bunch of different companies seeking certification, that definitely could slow things down. So, something to think about there. Kind of, we work with a lot of companies that have sort of more complicated ownership structures, and that's when you might need assistance from a lawyer to kind of explain that to SBA. If you have a simpler structure, sometimes it can be obviously a lot easier to demonstrate ownership and control by a veteran. If there's one owner, there's no minority owners. It's going to be a simpler proposition showing
Yeah.
that to SBA than if you've got a company with many minority owners, or companies that are minority owners, or different classes of ownership and things like that. So that's definitely one idea to think about, how you could get certified or start that process, and how that would work.
Yeah, definitely. That's, one of the things that I want to talk about next is the certification process. Um, and by the way, for those of you guys who are new to government contracting, if you've gone through the SAM.gov registration process, or you are about to go through this SAM.gov registration process, there's going to be a little box that you can check off in SAM. It's going to ask you, are you a veteran-owned business? Are you service disabled? And you can say yes. This is effectively kind of self-certifying, but you still have to go through the formal SBA certification now. They have done away with self-certifications for VOSB across the federal government for a while now. So you got to go through this SBA certification process. So next, I'd like to kind of talk about some of the challenges. I mean, there's several, but there's some common top ones that kind of hang people up a lot. But before we go to that, I do want to address one thing, because inside of the language of this bill, you talk about set asides, but you also talk about some sole source authority. Can you explain, even as it is today, because right now it's, the SDVOSBs have the 5% contracting goal. They have this kind of sole source authority language in there. Can you explain how the sole source authority language works, both at the VA as well as outside of the VA? Is it different? For example, like if the DoD wants to do a sole source with a vet versus the VA, and if this bill comes to pass, would that put the veterans' own sole source benefits kind of in a similar, framework?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so currently, all the agencies that operate under the FAR, which includes, Department of War, VA, state, all those types of agencies, DHS, and so forth, do have authority to make sole source awards to SDVOSBs under certain circumstances, but the authority is different. And I, unfortunately, off the top of my head, do not know the dollar limits. But first things first, there are dollar limits for those sole source contracts. And so you have a $1 limit that's the kind of general limit, and a second limit for contracts that are assigned manufacturing NAICS codes. It's a little higher. And again, I just don't know off the top of my head what those dollar limits are under, and I think they may have increased recently, but we can find that out very quickly. So there's a dollar limit for every agency as to how big a contract can be in terms of the dollars if it's awarded on a sole source basis to an SDVOSB. The VA has some special authority for SDVOSB sole sources that other agencies do not. And so for most agencies other than VA, sole source awards are not permitted unless the contracting officer has no reasonable expectation of receiving offers from 2 or more qualified, capable SDVOSBs were it to be competed. VA, under the certain dollar values, does not have to do that. VA can say, look, we know that if we put this out for competition, we might get 5 SDVOSBs bidding. But you know what? We just like company X, and they're qualified, they're capable, they've got a fair market price. We're just going to do that sole source contract to them. And what that looks a lot more like is the sort of authority that every agency has to do sole sources to 8A companies, because folks will say, why do 8A companies get so many more sole source contracts? And it's coming down now, but why historically have they gotten so many more sole source contracts than women owned, than service disabled veteran owned, than hubs owned? And it's a structural reason. There are 2 reasons for it. One is because certain companies on the 8A side that are owned by Indian tribes, by Alaska Native corporations, by Native Hawaiian organizations don't have to play by the dollar limits. They can get $100 million sole source contracts. So that's one reason. But the second reason is that the agencies don't have to go through this the same analysis of, are there 2 or more businesses that might be able to compete this? They can just go ahead and say, yeah, we might, if we competed it, we might get 38 A's that would bid, but we're going to award to company X because we love company X. And so that's the second reason why 8A sole sources have been so much more powerful than others SBA program sole sources over the years. And so the VA has authority that looks a lot more like 8A. And not coincidentally, if you look at the numbers, a large chunk of the sole source dollars that go to SDVOSBs come from the VA, because they have the stronger authority to do those kinds of awards. So that's where it is right now. Previous versions of this bill have said, look, we want to make the sole source authority look for VOSBs look more like the 8A authority. And there's been some, at least, talk about amending SDVOSB authority to do that, to allow that as well. I haven't seen a bill on that. That would take a bill of Congress to do that, but to kind of equalize the sole source authority of the various SBA certification programs. And so, as I read it, that's kind of what this bill is hoping to get at least under certain dollar values, because the bill does impose dollar values on dollar caps, essentially, on sole source awards.
All right. Well, thank you for that explanation, because I know that confuses a lot of SDVOSB veterans that I've talked with in the past, and they think that, like, hey, if there's this SDVOSB like sole source authority, you gotta like contract with me, but they don't have to contract with you. And typically they're outside of the VA, there is that process where they still have to seek the set asides first. But that's good to know, and it's really going to be good to see what kind of really becomes of all of this in the future. But kind of given all this news, and given really like the only thing right now, I think, outside of, if you're advocating for this, to maybe reach out to some of your representatives to ask them to push for it, to vote for it, to include it in the NDAA if they can. The only thing that really veterans probably can do right now, like Shane mentioned, is to kind of get ahead of it by just going ahead and getting their certifications if they don't already have them. And so let's talk about some of the big stumbling blocks. And we can start with you, Shane, because I think you started talking a little bit about this, but like the ownership and control. And I also want to specifically talk a little bit too while we're here about why is it so hard for SDVOSB or veteran-owned businesses that own franchises to basically, meet this unconditional control requirement, or they kind of get denied because of this, control requirement.
Yeah, I can start with the franchise question. And this has been something that's kind of popped up over the years, and you see different published decisions on it. You used to see back when the VA um, administered the certificate, or back then they call it verification, pretty much the same thing, but they changed the name for some reason. Back then when they verified companies, VA used to put out some little guidance documents, briefing documents about franchising, and basically saying it's not impossible or it's not strictly forbidden to have franchise company and get SDVOSB certification, but it is very difficult. And we don't have the little guidance documents from SBA, but we have the regulations and we have the case law decisions that have been pretty consistent over the years, basically saying that, you know, the veteran owner, the service disabled veteran owner or owners has to manage and control most of the daily actions, most of the actions of that company. There are some exceptions for minority owners for some um, extraordinary circumstances, such as selling the company. You can have a minority owner in there with some veto powers with a specified list of things related to minority owner sort of investment protection rights. But what we're talking about is a franchise agreement where the agreement says the franchisor, maybe it's a fast food company or something like that, has a lot of very specific rules on how to set up the office and
Mhm.
signage and those sorts of daily activities about how to manage your employees, how to, run your office. Those are things that have to be held by the control of the veteran. And so if you have your operating agreement will probably stay the same. So the company, maybe it's an LLC, they have their operating agreement says veteran controls everything, but then you have a separate agreement with your franchise um, company that says actually you cannot do certain things without the franchise company's approval. That would then violate the control requirements for the veteran. And since a lot of these franchise agreements are, covered all the minutia of running a business, they tend to cause problems for getting certification for that company, unless you have a big carve out. And I think a lot of these franchise agreements, they're not going to be the type of things where they say, oh, yeah, you can edit that, you can change it around
Yeah.
however you want. They're going to say, take it or leave it. And if you want to, if you've already signed it, especially, and then you go in to try and get certified, well, it could come up and you'd have to produce that document to SBA and they'd look at that and they'd probably say that creates control problems because the veteran cannot control certain daily, ordinary, or policy actions about how running that business. So it's a continuing issue. And, I know Steve has talked about this in some of his posts and other people have as well. Could they amend this rule? Could they provide some guidance? But that hasn't happened yet. So it definitely continues to be an issue if you've got that sort of agreement. I will say it's not just franchise agreements. I've occasionally seen other types of agreements that companies have with maybe it's a consultant or some company they're working with that could have those same kind of restrictions that could cause issues. So you want to be careful when you sign, if you're either a current SDVSB or you're seeking certification, or, like we were talking about, maybe it's a veteran-owned small business that wants to seek certification in the future or already is. What is the impact on these other agreements? And do they have um, very kind of minute details about operating the company that have to be approved by another business? You wouldn't want to have those sorts of restrictions in another agreement, franchise agreement being the most common. So that's kind of an overview of that situation.
Yeah. No, good information. Do you have anything to add on that uh, particular with regards to like franchises or unconditional control rules? They kind of trip people up, Stephen. Oh, did we lose Stephen? Shane, can you
Oh,
still hear
wait.
me?
Yes,
I
yes.
think
I think
Stephen
it
froze
did
up
lose
on
it for a
us.
second. Yeah, what I would say is when you're doing this process, if you're not having like a firm like ours do it, you have to look through the regulations, um, and look through your particular operating agreement, look through any other agreements you have, and then you basically, cross-reference those against the regulatory requirements. And some of them are kind of specific, but some of them are vague, when it comes to control by a veteran. For instance, if the operating agreement specifically gives a veto power to a minority owner that's for something like hired and fired employees, that's almost certainly going to result in a loss of control by the veteran. It's these more ambiguous ones or more nuanced ones where it can be a little bit more confusing. So, for instance, there's a rule about if a non-veteran controls the concern through loan agreements. So you could have a loan agreement that has these various prohibited actions, prohibited things that the veteran-owned company cannot do. Um, but it's okay if it's a commercially reasonable term. So that's something where a typical bank loan is not going to cause that problem. Or you could have a situation where you have economic dependence by the veteran owner on another company. And the regulation calls that business relationships causing dependence so that the veteran cannot exercise independent business judgment without great economic risk, which is kind of a mouthful. The example that VA used to use, and I use this one too, because it's sort of hard to kind of wrap your brain around that sentence, is say you have a company, you're seeking SDVOSB status, and you you work with some really friendly company and they gave you a lease on your office space and it's so much below market rent. The only way your business could operate is to have that really sweetheart deal on your lease. Then arguably you're so dependent on the other company, like basically your company would fail if you didn't have this really, really below market rent, that SBA could come in there and possibly, I want to say it's not guaranteed because this is definitely on a sliding scale, say that landlord, the veteran is so dependent on them, they couldn't, profitably operate the business without that sweetheart deal on the lease. So there's economic
Mhm.
dependence. So that's one you don't think about,
Yeah.
which is why I kind of say, well, all these things should be commercially reasonable. All the things should not be different than what you do with any sort of third party company you're doing business with. And so we kind of got to go through each one. Now, if you're just starting out, you have sort of typical subcontracts, you have a typical commercial lease. Um, those things, I don't want to get people too scared and say like every agreement's going to cause economic dependence. SBA doesn't interpret it that way. It has to be something very egregious. So uh, those are the kind of the steps that we take when we look at these. And of course, people can do that themselves. And a lot of time with our clients, we sort of say, a lot of this stuff will make sense to you. And we typically come in when it gets to the more complicated ones where you're interpreting a more complicated agreement or, analyzing it, or say you have dozens of minority owners, they have all these different classes of and shares of ownership. That's an area where you want to be able to explain it to SBA. I sometimes find that with SBA, if they get sort of confused by a presentation of something or how an operating agreement is written, that's when there can be concerns or risks that SBA is not going to approve that certification. So you want to be able to explain it. You want it to be pretty straightforward for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are some of
And
the issues that come up.
yeah, and I think, as I look at it, and I've talked to a lot of veterans on this topic as well. If you're 100% owner of your company and everything's kind of pretty standardized, you don't have any special agreements with any, companies that are just outside of the norm. Likely, once you go through the certification process and you look at the documents that you need to submit, you'll be pretty much good to go. I do think it's always good to reach out to your Apex Accelerator, or if you want to reach out to a GovCon attorney to look at how your operating agreements and bylaws and all that stuff was set up. When you start to basically have partners, it starts to get a little bit
Mhm.
more scrutinized. When you have these agreements that come into play, it gets a little bit more scrutinized there. And
Yeah,
that's where you want to make sure that whatever, like if you have a partnership agreement, even that basically there's nothing in that that basically says that, you know, your partners in some kind of scenario would basically be able to own or control your business. And so that's, you know, why the more complicated that your
Mhm.
structure is, the more I would encourage you to, you know, reach out to somebody like Shane. And before you go through the certification process and then perhaps get denied, you know, you
Yeah,
can fix all of this stuff so that you go through clean.
I would say one other example that's kind of come up just from different people I've been talking to, and different comments we've gotten on our website and things like that is the direct ownership requirement, which seems, you know, you kind of look at that rule, it's pretty straightforward, but I think sometimes people have other goals, obviously, in life. Maybe they're doing some sort of, um, you know, there's different things, maybe asset protection or something like that, where they have other goals, or maybe there's tax reasons. And so they have like a complicated ownership structure. Maybe they've got a trust or
Yeah,
something
I've
like
heard
that.
that before.
And
Like if you,
then, yeah, if you then have you want to start your SDVOSB company, or you want to get it certified, and the simplest way, what SBA is sort of looking for in the simplest case is directly owned by the actual veteran. So it says their name, you know, John Q. Veteran as
yeah,
51% owner of that company. And then, you know, you can't change that. If you change it, you have to, I mean, you can change it, but you have to notify SBA if you're already certified. If you have a trust or something like that, it might work, but it might not based on how the trust is structured. So again, it definitely goes back to your point, Carol. If you've got a trust, you got to think about it more. If you've got, it's currently you have a company, you know, you own a holding company and it's got multiple levels of ownership, then you got to think, well, wait, do I start another company and get that certified as a SDVSB? Do I
yeah,
merge the companies? Do I transfer ownership? And then maybe all those things are fine, but then you definitely want to document that process, because SBA may then ask, well, we want to see how the, you know, follow the bouncing ball. How did this ownership change? When did it happen? Um, so all those things can be done, but you don't want to go into the process and then learn, oh, SBA didn't like how I set up my ownership structure and then have to change it. It's better to kind of figure that all out ahead of time, like you're saying, on the ownership side, and then um, on the control side. Another one that's sort of come up over the years is certain rights that a minority owner might have with respect to um, control over the sale, you know, right of first refusal. And SBA did actually make things a little bit easier, and they basically said you can have a commercially reasonable right of first refusal for the minority owner. Before that had been, you couldn't do that, you know, so that means if the veteran owner wants to sell, the minority owners have the right to buy it first. That's the right of first refusal. That used to be not allowed under under these
yeah,
regulations, but SBA so they have made things more flexible over the years, and we've definitely read about that on our blog. They used to have a rule that said you had to be within a certain reasonable distance from your office, or you could
mm,
lose veteran control. That has been gotten rid of. So if you still see that somewhere out there, don't worry about that one anymore. Kind of kudos to SBA for making some of those things less
yeah.
restrictive and more flexible over the years.
They still have the highest officer position requirement. How about the highest paid position? Does the veteran still have to hold the highest paid, or is there some waivers they can say, well, you know, we have this person at this level because, yeah, how does that work
Yeah.
now?
Well, yeah, the highest compensation rule is still in effect. The highest officer has to have the highest compensation, but like you're saying, it does sort of have an exception. You have to show that if another person in the business is getting higher compensation, you have to show that's commercially reasonable, or that the veteran has done that and it's going to benefit the concern. So again, it's one of those where it, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but there's also full-time devotion. Kind of has that same feature. There's a rule, but then there's kind of an exception. But if you want to prove to SBA that it works, you have to provide a letter of explanation. In the case of highest compensation, you'd want to have some actual facts show why it's necessary that the veteran would not have the highest compensation. And maybe that's based on your industry. Maybe that's based on the unique nature of that employee that is so crucial to your business that they are really needed to be in there to help the business expand. They have some sort of specialized skill. It's only for a limited amount of time. You could say different things, but it has to be something that's based on your, your unique circumstances in your industry. So
Yeah.
that rule is still in effect, but it needs to be demonstrated to SBA. And in fact, the rule says if like, so we're talking sort of about that snapshot in time when you get certified, but these rules do continue for, however long you want to maintain SDVOSB status. So if you do, when you get certified, the CEO is a veteran, they're highest compensated, and that's fine. And SBA approves that. If you then fall below and there's another employee that's getting a higher compensation, you have to notify SBA within 30 days. Similar to if you change ownership, the veteran ownership, you have to notify SBA within 30 days. So these things are ongoing kind of notification requirements, even
So
after that initial time.
this is a great question and we're going to shift now to talking about keeping certification for those who've gotten certified, because there's going to be a point where you have to recertify. It's typically, it's 3 years, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Three
you'll
years,
kind of
unless
go
asked
through the
earlier, but yeah,
process
standard
again,
3.
right? Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh, but if you have changes like you just mentioned, like let's just say if veteran sells a part of their company, they have to let the SBA know that, correct?
Correct.
And
Yep.
then they basically get another look. How do they let the SBA know this? Is there a special email address? Do they go back into some kind of certification portal?
Yeah, you have to go through the certification portal. And so yeah, you gotta of course maintain those logins and things like that.
Yeah,
Or figure out how to get back in. And then there's a little process where you kind of notify the SBA of that change and then provide the documentation that you upload
yeah,
through that certification portal. And then, it is a 30-day window. And then people sometimes say, what if I miss that? I would say, first try to hit that 30-day window. If not, do it as soon as possible. Explain to SBA why, give them an honest reason why you may have missed that, and give them as much information as possible. We've had that happen with some different companies we worked with, and SBA was again somewhat flexible with them. It's not like you're going to be automatically kicked out, but you want to do that as soon as possible. And
yeah,
by that same token, sometimes people say, well, I'm proposing this sort of complicated sales structure, and I'd like SBA to sort of approve that in advance. And unfortunately, with the SDVSB program, they won't do that. You have to sort of make the change, do the sale, and then seek
yeah.
SBA's approval after the
But
fact.
before you do all of that, I would
Yeah.
say reach out to your GovCon attorney to see, hey, and this is with
Yeah.
anything, like once you're certified, if you've got like a company that's even sending you like a big agreement that's got a lot into it, and you may, if you're working with a GovCon attorney, just say, hey, can you check this out to make sure it doesn't flag for any potential issues that are going to cost me my certification?
Exactly. We do that a lot.
Yeah,
Obviously it's a more complicated agreement. But yeah, sometimes it happens either with often with the investor coming in. We've definitely seen companies get more successful. There may be these private equity funds. There may be just someone out there that wants to expand these different businesses, and then they can do that. They can have a minority share in the SDVSB. That veteran can kind of get some return on all of its work it's done over the years through selling part of the business. But then you have to be careful with how you're structuring that, and then how you're revising your entity documents. Just like you're saying, Carol, review all of that. SBA does, keep some very strong restrictions on those minority owners. And the minority owner may say, well, I want to have this right and that veto power and this vote. And some of them may be okay, and some of them kind of get too close to the line that you don't want to test it at SBA, and we can definitely review those for people. We've done that for a lot of different clients over the years.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Stephen, you back with us?
Yeah, I think so. So I apologize for that. We're having some work done around the house, and I'm, working in a construction zone. I think they knocked the internet out on me while I was here. So I apologize for that. That's all right, because we got Shane here to, to answer all
Yeah.
the questions, and he was rock and rolling. So you guys
Yeah,
didn't
man.
miss me at all. It's cool.
Well, I'm glad we had Shane here, man, because I wouldn't have been wanting to
Hey,
answer
you've
them
just
all.
been
I've been
going on
interviewing
by
myself.
yourself.
Yeah. Well, hey, Stephen, now that you're back, and we're going to be doing our little segue to the live Q&A. I've got a couple of more things I wanted to cover. One of the things, Stephen, is something that's frequently overlooked, and it's something very important for those who are actually got the certification and you're participating in a set aside. And this is the overlooking this requirement around the limitations on subcontracting, which is written into the VA acquisition regulation at 852.219-75. Can you talk about, like, kind of within this, what do veterans need to know? I think a lot of people don't even really understand what limitations on subcontracting mean. And then how do you maintain compliance with this as a veteran-owned small business, especially if you're doing business with the VA? And is there a similar certification or provision outside of the VA with regards to what has to be done?
Yeah, so this is a great question. The limitation on subcontracting, for those who are not familiar with just kind of the concept as a whole, is it applies to not just SDVOSBs, but applies to any type of small business set aside or sole source contract that at least is above the simplified acquisition threshold, and applies to all SDVOSB type set aside contracts, regardless of whether it's above or below the simplified acquisition threshold. And that's just the concept that the government's trying to balance a couple things, policy wise. One is to recognize that, especially when it comes to contracts that are of a certain complexity, dollar value, etc., just telling SDVOSB or any small business that you can't have a subcontractor is not helpful, because it means that there will be a lot of opportunities that a small business or an SDVOSB, VOSB cannot successfully pursue and perform without subs, because it's just what needs to be done. And think about a general construction contractor. They typically sub out the trades. They sub out plumbing. They sub out the HVAC. They sub out the masonry, all that sort of stuff. If you say you can't have subcontractors, then they're not going to be able to bid and win the contract. And so you got to allow subcontractors. On the other hand, we don't want to allow just what's called pass-throughs. Situations where a small business or a certified, some company that's certified SDVOSB 8A, whatever, wins a contract, takes a cut off the top, and just subs all the work out to somebody who doesn't have that status, because that doesn't benefit that company. It doesn't benefit the public policy of growing and developing companies that have those kinds of statuses. It just ends up costing the taxpayers more money to get some large business that could have won the contract if it had been unrestricted. There's no public policy benefit to that. So there's this intermediary kind of place where we try to meet those two policies, and that's called limitation on subcontracting. And that says, look, if you are a small business, you're an SDVOSB, what have you, yes, you can subcontract. In fact, you can subcontract to companies that are not small businesses, that are large, but only up to a certain point, unless they're what's called a similarly situated entity, which we won't get into here. But and the amount you're allowed to subcontract is going to vary depending on the nature of the contract. And so if it's a services contract, you can subcontract a certain dollar amount. If it's a construction contract, you may be able to subcontract more, because the nature of those contracts and how realistic it is to expect you to self-perform a certain amount of the work versus subbing it out. And so those limits are generally set forth in two places. They're in the FAR clause, FAR 52219-14, which you're going to find incorporated in any contract in which the limitation on subcontracting would apply. And they are also set forth in the SBA's regulations, 13 CFR 125.6. And so those regulations for many years were actually it had different formulas and such. They're pretty close now, although the SBA has since adopted some changes to its regulation that have yet to be incorporated in the FAR. And then the Department of War came in and did a deviation to match the SBA rules. So there's still some complexities there. So you got to look at your specific contract. For our purposes, the VA under the VAR has gone a little bit farther when it comes to limitations on subcontracting. And so, the VA has, the sort of similar formulas as you would find for other types of contracts. You would find, the same construction formulas, services contracts, formulas, etc. However, the VA says essentially up front, you've got to submit a certificate that you're going to comply with the limitation on subcontracting. They want that submitted as part of the offer. And so when you're reading that clause, that VAR clause that you referenced, there's a piece of it that says, you must fill out the certificate of compliance with the limitation on subcontracting and submit it with your offer. And if you don't do that, we can kick you out of the competition. So it's something to know with the VA. Often this is going to be highlighted in the solicitation itself. It'll be spelled out in full text. But even if they just incorporate that clause by reference, they list the VAR clause number, limitation on subcontracting, it's just like they had spelled it out in practice. So I have seen cases where folks didn't submit the certificate and the VA said, well, you haven't abided by the terms of the solicitation, which said to be considered, you had to affirmatively comply, to affirmatively submit the certificate of compliance with the limitation on subcontracting, which is not how it works outside the VA, at least not in a clause. An agency could ask that as part of a proposal, but generally speaking, just by submitting an offer that incorporates FAR 52-21914, that the submission of the offer itself is sort of your certificate that you intend to comply. But the VA goes a step farther when it comes to its SDVOSB and VOSB contracts and wants an affirmative certificate. I don't know, Shane, do you have things to add on that? You may have some more stories on those clauses too.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's been kind of up a lot lately because it is different, and like you said, it requires that actual signature. We wrote about this case. You might have wrote about this one from this year where the federal judge very much said, yes, if it says you have to sign it, you have to sign it. But I've also seen where the VA itself forgot to check the box of which percentage applied, 50%, 85%. And then they said, well, you didn't comply because the box wasn't checked, which seems harsh. But you definitely need to check that, or I shouldn't use the word check there. You definitely need to review that part of the clause. Did the VA do it right? Did they check the right box for 50%, for instance, for services versus construction? And if not, then maybe ask a question to the VA. But it's come up repeatedly. So the VA, it's a new requirement for the VA. So they're having to implement into their procedures and systems, and there can be mistakes there or confusion. And then there's, published decisions on it. And I'll also say the VA does have a kind of a focus on this, because I've seen it with some clients where the VA, so that we're talking about at the offer stage, you must, certify to this and sign it. And then during performance, the VA has specifically asked for, or I've seen it at time of award, they say, well, actually really explain how you're going to do this. You certified it, now explain it. And during performance, they say, you said you would certify, you told us how you do it. Now prove that you actually met those limitations on subcontracting. I have not seen that as much with other agencies on a regular basis, but the VA does do that. So the VA has a special focus on this. I mean, they have a special place in the country. They have a special programs for veterans, but they also put a little bit more hyper focus on meeting these limitations on subcontracting. Not that you should, just not follow it with other agencies as well, but if you're working with the VA in particular, be prepared to document it just like you would with any other agency, but even more so with the VA.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I would say that compliance goes back, that focus on that compliance, not necessarily the clause itself, but the focus on compliance at VA goes back, to when I was practicing now 5-6 years ago, and I was working with clients on that too. And VA, I think, really maybe having seen some of the headlines in past years about pass-throughs and such, said, yeah, we're going to make sure we don't have these sorts of headlines. We're going to make sure that our veteran-owned businesses really get the benefits to which they're entitled, and we're going to audit these contracts and make sure that after performance, that the SDVOSB prime or the VOSB prime is getting the benefits of the contracts that they're entitled to. So So yeah, it's a long-standing focus for VA and something for folks to know. Obviously, you got to comply with these clauses no matter what agency you're bidding. But if you're bidding VA and it's an SDVOSB or VOSB type contract, you should really expect not only to have that front end certificate, but as Shane said, back end compliance review could well happen as well.
Yeah. In the situation of an IDIQ contract, or if they're on GSA schedules, do they have to do this now for each individual delivery order or task order, or is it kind of like, do they have to meet the limitations on subcontracting over the life of the contract vehicle?
Well, at
Like,
least
let's
under
say if it was a
yeah.
5-year contract, for example, IDIQ may talk with the VA. Do they have to meet the limitations on subcontracting within the 5 years over time? And how is that monitored? Or is it just the one time or per task order when they submit that? Do you know? I'm just curious.
Are we talking about the VA now, or are we talking
Yeah, let's
about?
say like a VA IDIQ contract, right? And there's a, solicitation for a
Yeah,
task order.
yeah. So so there are a couple options for that. So um, depending on the nature of the set aside contract, it could be the period of performance of each order, or the contracting officer could, at their discretion, as I understand it, require the period of compliance to be the term of the contract. In other words, base year plus each option year. And so
Yeah.
that's an issue where, as I understand it, at least you would need to check your contract and say, hey, how are we determining it for this contract? Is it going to be
Yeah.
have an order by order basis, or is it going to be over the period of the contract? Or
Okay.
like, but not the
Yeah.
entire 5-year period, but like base year plus each option year. Because what you have is that there used to be a formula where it was like the life of the contract, including the option years, but then the agency wouldn't exercise the option. And so you'd have a large business be like, well, we're doing 99% of the work in the first year, and then we'll see
Yeah.
what, but we'll make it up in year 5. And then they never get to year 5. And so I
Yeah.
think SBA was a little wary about that structure in the past.
Yeah. 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 All right. Well, one more question for you, Stephen, before we shift to the Q&A. Because you had mentioned something about how veterans can use the 8A program strategically as a part of a broader government contracting growth plan. Do you want to share some thoughts on that?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question that time.
So I think you had mentioned something about how veterans might be able to use the 8A program or an 8A program strategically as part of the broader government contracting growth plan.
Yeah, and this is an interesting one because 8A program is in such a state of flux, as we're going to talk about more
Yeah.
next time around. But as that gets ironed out, I mean, I think that for me, there's a kind of a false narrative that's out there, kind of floating around right now in government contracting, which is that these programs are silos. That you're either SDVOSB or 8A, and if the 8A program gets $1, then it's taking it away from the SDVOSB program, or something like that. And that's just not correct when you look at the data. In fact, there are a lot of veteran-owned companies that are 8A certified. They have both the SDVOSB or VOSB certification and the 8A certification. In fact, the government, you go back and look at the numbers, and you can look at this on what's called the SBA Small Business Data Hub, where they publish some of the data, and you can break it down by set-aside stats. It's a pretty easy to use site. And it shows there are billions of dollars being awarded to veteran-owned companies under the 8A program. And so, why would a owned company go and get 8A certified? Well, because that opens up doors to more opportunities. Contracts are being set aside for 8A, as well as sole source opportunities that take advantage of that special 8A sole source authority that currently other than the VA agencies don't have. They have to go that there are 2 or more SDVOSBs that can bid, we have to compete it. On 8A, they don't have to do that. They can just say, hey, we like this company. They're qualified. They're capable. They're proposing a fair market price. The dollar values line up. We're going to award you on a sole source basis. So I think considering that certification on a strategic level makes sense. I would not necessarily apply right now, because the SBA
Yeah.
has not admitted any 8A program companies in the recent months. It's been almost a year, in fact, to my knowledge, since they last admitted an 8A company to the program. And there have been some proposed eligibility changes regarding social disadvantage. So we're going to talk about all this next month. So
Yeah.
I think it's something for, for companies who are SDVOSB, VOSB to keep in mind as a potential an add-on to their government contracting arsenal. But unless there's a real reason to go ahead and proceed with that application now, it may be something like, you know what, let's put a pin in that and come back in 6 months and see where the
Yeah.
landscape is on 8A and see if this is the right time to apply. At least that's my 2
Yeah.
cents on it.
No, I 100% agree on that. I think it's really important though to pay attention with what's happening right now and join us next month. And again, we're going to be doing that on I think the second Wednesday of August. And we'll get out some information for those of you guys who are on our email distribution list and everything like that. But we're going to be talking about a couple of current bills that, if they pass, would significantly change the 8A program as well as the eligibility criteria to get in, which might open the door for people who maybe previously weren't available to get certified in that. So this is going to be something very interesting to follow. Even if you don't get that certification or qualify for it, there is still a lot of opportunities, and it happens a lot where SDVOSBs will team up with other 8A firms. Each of them have their own unique advantages that can kind of like be a win-win as well. So think about that from the teaming perspective as well. So that kind of covers the discussion part of that. Shane or Stephen, did you guys have anything else you wanted to mention or say before we kind of shift into the Q&A?
I think that's good. I would just add, just turning back to our limitation on subcontracting item, joint ventures also have some special rules at VA regarding, certificates and that sort of thing that are being enforced at least at VA and not necessarily as much at other agencies under the SBA rules. So I just published an article on a case involving a VA contract in which they excluded a company because the company it was a joint venture, didn't provide some certificates that were required, sort of like what we saw in the limitation on subcontracting side. So this time was joint venture related certificates. And those are certificates that are required actually under the SBA rules. But VA adopted those in its solicitation, said you have to submit them. Company didn't do it. They got kicked out. And GAO said, yep, and got kicked out. So just keep that in mind. There's just some extra paperwork requirement when you're dealing with these kinds of SDVOSB contracts sometimes, but that can still be well worth it because there's a lot of dollars. Like I said, 5% of federal prime contracting dollars for these companies last year. It's a very valuable certification.
Absolutely. All righty. Let's go ahead and shift over to our Q&A now. Again, brought to you by our trusted legal partners at Co-Prince McCall Potroff LLC. And I'm going to leave the contact information up during the Q&A just in case you guys joined us late and didn't get it during the housekeeping session. Again, these are some of our go-to partners. In fact, it's been my personal legal firm over the years. So if you want to reach out to them, if you have an issue related to certification or a question or a strategy that you think that you want to do and you want to run it by one of the attorneys first, we're going to keep their information up there. So I also want to mention that if you joined us late and you didn't get to the housekeeping, one thing that I was asking in the Q&A here is to please post your questions in that Q&A box, not inside of the chat box. I see there's been some questions inside of the chat box, but I don't want to have to try to look at two different places. So if you've posted it in the chat box, please just copy and paste it over into the Q&A box so that's front and center. I'm going to relay those questions on to our experts. Also, if you want to raise your hand and come on and ask your question live, use the little raise your hand feature in the control panel. I can unmute your mic and you can come on and do that. I do see one hand raised, so we will start with this one. Actually, Elena, I think that you're going to have to unmute the mics there because I don't have the control there anymore.
Carol, would you like to take over the controls?
Yeah, go ahead and give me the host again.
Okay,
can
now you're
unmute
gonna have to
them.
tell me how I do that.
Uh, click on my name in the attendees
Okay.
box and then the little three dots and just promote to host.
Oh, I see that.
Yeah. All right.
All
While we're
right.
doing that, yeah, we got that set up. Let's go to, so I don't know if Eric still has a question, but Eric, I just unmuted your mic if you want to ask a question. You have to unmute on your end.
I did not. I accidentally hit the hand button.
All right. I see also Robert has a question. So I'll ask you to unmute your mic, Robert, and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, sir. Do you have me on the audio?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. All righty. I have my unique entity ID and cage ID code. I'm doing a name change. I'm waiting very patiently for my 147 letter from the IRS with the name change. I cannot change my name on sam.gov. That's holding up my vet cert and everything else. It's been almost 90 days since I submitted for the name change. I submitted by way of my tax returns through my accountant, as well as a certified overnight letter, which they did acknowledge they received. I called twice and confirmed twice that my paperwork is in good order and that I just need to wait. So I waited, and then I contacted my congressperson and I submitted the TAS form 911. So is there any way to move this along any quicker? Because this just doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Shane, is that something that you guys, like if people are having issues around structural changes or name changes, affecting their, registrations or even their certifications, is that something that you guys get involved with?
Well, we don't help with the IRS side of it. There may be attorneys out there, maybe through your accountant. Sounds like you're already kind of taking those steps. We do
Yeah, I
help.
was just wondering if
Yeah.
there's somebody that I'm not aware of. It's not the first time. Example, when I went to college, the university would release my college fund, and there was somebody locally who was able to make that happen. So
I mean, I remember my old practice, I used to have to call the IRS and just go through the
Yeah.
taxpayer assistant hotline.
yeah,
And is that what you've tried?
I see.
They do. They interview you, and then they tell you, yes, we have it, and we don't know when we're going to do it.
Yeah.
So do I have the letter? No.
I, s-
When? We don't know.
I see Scott Knapp has his hand up. Scott is with the Apex Accelerator program. So Scott, I don't know if you have a question or you have a tip for Robert, but I know also the Apex Accelerator programs, they kind of work a lot with these little hangups, especially with.
I have a mentor. I have a mentor.
Okay, go
I'm
ahead.
working very closely with Apex, and he has he's nothing up his sleeve to help. So
Okay, Scott, do you have any feedback or did you have a question?
Yeah, I don't think I have anything up my sleeve, but ordinarily, and it's probably happening with a change at IRS, ordinarily new companies coming in, it's at least a 5-week waiting period. It's not.
actually not a new company. It's a company that's been in existence.
No, I
for 40
understand,
years.
but
Is that make it worse?
the problem is the IRS getting the information to Sam is about a 5-week process.
In
And
and of
there's
itself.
some reason for that. I don't know.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess I'll be washing dishes for the next 9 months then. Okay.
All right. Hey, thanks, Robert. I hope you get it resolved soon. And
I will. I promise.
Yeah,
right.
the congressional step
I
is a
appreciate
good
you all.
one.
Yeah.
Appreciate you all. I
Sorry.
really do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. I wish I had a magic bullet for that one, Rob. That's real frustrating. So
Yeah.
but we
Patience.
wish you luck. Yep.
All righty. I know there was a couple of questions in the queue about will we get the slides out? We don't really have the slide. Well, we have slides here, but we don't typically send those out because they just don't have a lot of the content information on those like we do in the webinars. But we will again post the video here to our YouTube channel. So govology.com. Let's see here. Let me pull up the YouTube channel again. So if you guys want to rewatch the video or get any of the links or anything like that, I can also post some of these links inside of the chat here as well if you guys want some of these links while we're answering some of the next questions. So I will go ahead and do that as well. So let's go to the next question here. It says this one is for Steve, and it says, is there any provision in the pending legislation to address the SDVOSB of ROSB funded companies? We have been pushing this for the last 5 years and have had your firm review the options. It previously came down to the revocable trust and 401k holding the majority of shares. Any insights?
Yeah, I wish I could say there was, but this legislation does not include anything like that. It is literally just as said, a bill to set up this veteran-owned small business preference program that would kind of mirror what we currently have. And so, yeah, that's not to say this isn't the only reform that's needed in this area. It's good to see that some of these members of Congress are at least working on some of this stuff. Perhaps some of the current sponsors of the bill would be interesting people to contact them or their staff about other potential legislation that might be helpful in this field, since they're obviously interested and somewhat knowledgeable in this field at this point. I started my career on Capitol Hill. I was only there for a couple of years, but it's, once you get the right staffer who's interested and knowledgeable about an area, that could be a good person to work with. But yeah, at this point, unfortunately, I don't have anything more in that bill on this topic. It is just kind of narrowly focused on this VOSB preference program.
All right.
Yeah, I haven't seen any updates on that either, unfortunately. You can always contact the SBA, but that's even sort of less of a transparent process than than contacting your legislators.
All right.
But you definitely can make those recommendations to them.
Awesome. Thank you. And good to see you, Michael. Two questions. One, you mentioned a 5% goal for SDVOSB awarded prime contracts. Are there SDVOSB subcontracting goals? And two, how does the government track these goals through prime contracting, subcontracting plans?
Yeah, and so yes, there's a 5% prime contracting goal and 5% subcontracting goal as well. So as I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, Shane, that's a veteran-owned small business goal, the subcontracting level, right? That includes those companies as well, I believe. But and it would be through subcontracting plans. So the large businesses have subcontracting plans. For those who aren't familiar with that concept, and in which they are supposed to agree to subcontract certain amounts of their work to various categories of small businesses. And then the agencies are, evaluated every year on their compliance, not just with the prime contract goals, but with the subcontract goals as well. And so the SBA recently came out with its small business scorecard, and you'll see there are 10 different goals. There are 5 prime contract goals, and there are 5 subcontract goals. And I think the government met 5 or 6 of the goals, so it didn't meet all the goals. But you can look at that scorecard. It's called the SBA Small Business Procurement Scorecard. And you can see every goal that's out there at the prime and subcontracting level. You can also see from that data how the government did as a whole, and I think critically how individual agencies are doing, because that can give you some insight as to which agencies, for example, including the subcontracting level, are really pushing this stuff, because it's not just the subcontracting goals. You'll see solicitations out there that will say, and we just had a couple of GAO cases that involve this that I saw, where the agency is asking for firmer commitments as part of the proposal to subcontract, 30% of the contract to small business, for example. And if you don't do that, you can't play in this solicitation. Or there'll be included a valuation factor that looks at not only what are you proposing for small business subcontracting in this contract, but how have you done on your goals in the past? And so there are ways that agencies can really prioritize that sort of thing. And I think some of that starts to get reflected in some of the numbers you see on the scorecard as well. But yeah, there is subcontracting is a viable option for these companies as well. And there are goals out there, and the procurement scorecard would be a good place to look to see how individual agencies are doing with respect to each of those subcontracting goals.
All right.
Yeah.
I know, yeah, I noticed that Michael, who had asked the last question, had his hand up. I don't know if he had a second part to that, but Michael, I'm going to unmute you. You can unmute yourself if you still, did you have another question you wanted to ask there?
No, I'm good, Carol. Thanks. Sorry.
Okay, good to see you again. All
Good,
right.
good, sir.
All right, take care.
Stephen and Shane.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right, next question. I have both SBA certs for VOSB and SDVOSB. Does that mean I can participate in both set-asides when the VOSB gets passed into law?
My sense would be yes. I mean, and this is an interesting component of the bill, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Shane, as well. But every SDVOSB is also a VOSB, right? Because an SDVOSB is just a VOSB in which the owner or owners have a service-connected disability. So every SDVOSB is also a VOSB. I did not see anything in the current bill that says this 5% goal is only for VOSBs in which the owner is not service disabled. And so, if you're an SDVOSB, you're also a VOSB. As the bill is written right now, just says SBA certified VOSBs, that gets passed into law. I would think that anybody who holds that cert, including current SDVOSBs, would be eligible because, again, they're also VOSBs. And so it'll be interesting to see if there's any push to kind of say, well, we want a separate track for folks who aren't service disabled. But that almost seems like we're penalizing the service connected disability community. So we'll see how that goes. But as I read it, again, this is just my reading of the bill. There is nothing that would prevent a company that has both certs from bidding on those contracts. It just says if you're a certified VOSB, you're eligible for this 5% new goal in the set asides. Shane, is that your reading too?
Yeah, I would agree. And based on the language of the proposed legislation, it seems to be identical. And just from a policy perspective, that would make sense too with how SBA has been doing it.
Yeah, and I wrote about that in not in this article, but in one of the articles about the previous ones that came up in the House, the here we go again type thing, saying, look, this bill is, going to create a lot more opportunities potentially for SDVOSBs too, because there are also VOSBs, and if you added a 5% goal on for VOSBs to the SDVOSB goal, that's another 5% field potentially these companies can bid in.
Although if they're already okay, that just made me think of something. If they're already meeting the 5% goal for SDVOSBs, shouldn't they have a higher goal for VOSBs? Presumably there's a lot more companies there.
Right. And so that was one of my questions and I actually had that question and I'm not going to name names, but I was talking to somebody who's been connected with promoting this bill on Capitol Hill. And I said exactly what you said, Shane. I was like,
smart.
Wouldn't the goal for VOSB be met just by awarding your SDVOSBs and also counting them as VOSB awards? Wouldn't you need to specify essentially that that the goal can only be met by like VOSB set aside contracts or something like that in order to make this happen? They're like, oh man, we might want to think about that at least at the regulatory phase, because that's obviously the intent. The intent is not just to say, well, we got 5% SDVOSB awards. All those companies are also VOSBs, so we met the 5% goal. We're done here. Like that's obviously not the intent. The intent is to create a whole new category of set asides that are being pushed out for companies that have the VOSB status, regardless of whether the owner is service disabled. So I think there may be some tweaking that needs to happen, potentially not even at the statutory level, but at the regulation writing level within SBA, if this gets to them, to make sure that intent is carried through, because you could definitely otherwise end up with a situation where you create this new program, but the government just double dips and counts and checks the box for SDVOSB and VOSB for all their current SDVOSB contracts, and nothing happened. And that's not what the authors of the bill are trying to do. I mean, I can promise you that. So I had that conversation, again, not going to name names, and they're like, oh, yep, that's something we might want to be thinking about for moving forward. So we'll see where that goes. But that's a great point, Shane. I had the same issue myself when I thought that.
All right. Are you guys ready for the lightning round? Since we have 4 minutes left.
All right, we can win great prizes. Let's do it.
And these a couple really I can answer really quick. The next one is my understanding is that of the SDVOSB cert is possible. even with a 0% disability. Is this still correct? Will this continue, do you think? This is the correct response. A lot of people don't understand this. If you're a service disabled veteran and you've got a rating from the VA of anywhere from 0% to 100%, it kind of sounds odd if you get a letter back from the VA if you've gone through the process and they say, yes, we acknowledge this condition at a 0% rating. That doesn't get you any money from the VA at that point for a like a just a disabled veteran, but it does qualify you for the service disabled veteran program. And what I've advocated for a lot of the times, given that there's a preference of SDVOSB inside of the VA, especially if you are a veteran and you served, and go get your medical records. And I mean, anything that's occurred in your medical records, there's a great organization called the Disabled American Veterans, DAV. They will sit down with you and help you basically, take your records, or they can help you find and get access to your records if you don't have them, and then put them through the process with the VA so you can actually see what you qualify, even outside of contracting for VA benefits. But also then if they put you through that process, if you get a rating, that 0% even rating will qualify you for the SDVOSB program. And I think it's not going to change in the future, correct, guys?
I don't think it's going to change. And I think for those who are not familiar with this universe, 0% sounds like, well, the person's doesn't have a disability at all. And that's not what it means. It means you have a service connected disability, but not one that rises to the level where the VA believes it has a significant enough impact on your day-to-day life to warrant some higher rating and potentially getting compensation for it. So, it doesn't mean you're not disabled, because then every VOSB would also be an SDVOSB. But it does mean that a lot of folks who may not have really pursued that rating, because like what good does it do me? I'm not going to get any disability benefits. There are benefits, not just this program, but other benefits as well. But this program, this SDVOSB program, is open to 0%, and I've not seen any indication that that's going to change.
Yeah. There was a quick question about the update on the WOSB bills going through Congress. We will be talking about that next month, potentially quashing the program. So jump in with us next month and we'll kind of go into some depth on that topic. Somebody asked, is there a place on Gavology site where the abbreviations used in this video are explained? No, not right now, but I have been wanting to build a Gavology dictionary.
The RFO said they're going to have a new clause that has all the abbreviations. I noticed that. So
yeah, they did. RFO is Revolutionary Fire Overhaul, by the way. So that's another one.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, and I do apologize for that, because we always aim these discussions for a certain level of knowledge, and some people have beyond that, and some have less than that, and then the acronyms are one of them. So that if we didn't define an acronym, then you're like, what the heck is that? That's on us, and feel free to contact one of us and be like, I didn't understand what that acronym meant, because it is just kind of an alphabet soup here in government contracting. But Shane's absolutely right. The Revolutionary Fire Overhaul, this current process of overhauling, rewriting the FAR, they said we're going to include an acronym dictionary in the FAR itself. Federal Acquisition Regulation is going to include an acronym dictionary, which would be wonderful.
Yeah. Another quick question was asked about, like, for a new SDVOSB that plans to start as a subcontractor to large primes, what are the most common ways those relationships accidentally create affiliation or control issues that later blow up SBA or VA certifications? Since we're out of time, we really don't have time to go into the depths of that particular thing. I would encourage you, go get and talk with your Apex accelerator, and if you need some additional, like, specific legal advice, reach out to Shane and have a conversation with their team. That's what I would do if I was in a situation where, hey, I've got this big thing that I want to do with this company that wants to pair up with us. And so just to make sure you got everything correct there.
Yeah, we've done that exact thing. So
yeah,
we talk to people about that. It's more of a legal advice issue.
Yep.
Yeah,
yep.
somebody asked if certificates are going to be sent out for this particular show. We don't do certificates for this show. This is not like our typical training situation. So unfortunately, we don't have certificates for this show. Let's see. And last one here is I just wanted to clarify something, unless I missed it. I understood that the eligibility requirements for a service disabled veteran-owned small business have changed over time. Is it correct that a veteran no longer has to meet the disability rating such as 60%, and that even, I think that was the same question. You don't have to have a 60% rating. You can have a 0% rating. So,
Correct. Yep. 0 to
yeah.
100. Any ratings, any
And the name of
disability
the,
rating.
and again, the name of the organization that you're going to reach out to, Disabled American Veterans. By the way, they're also a great nonprofit to donate to that helps veterans with this work at no cost. So first you want to go through the VA and get your disability rating from the VA. That's a separate process than going through the SDVOSB vet cert certification at the SBA. Once you have that through the VA and you've got this letter that says they basically have reviewed your medical records and acknowledged this disability rating and they say 0%, you qualify as an SDVOSB if you go through the certification process now with the VA. You're going to need to hold on to that letter because it's going to be something that you're going to submit with your application. And I think we're out of time, 2 minutes over actually. So, Shane and Stephen, did you have any last minute thoughts or anything you wanted to share before we head out today?
Yeah, I think I kind of made the point that SBA has made some of these things more flexible, especially with the SDVOSB program. But yeah, if you have something more complicated, reach out to someone like myself or other counsel that may be able to help you with those issues. But thank you all.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks
thank you, everyone. These rules can be pretty complicated, so it's always good to get assistance on the front end rather than getting challenged on the back end. So call someone like Shane if you have questions. But I've worked with a lot of clients who've been very successful winning contracts, subcontracts through this program. So it's absolutely worth pursuing if you qualify.
All righty. Well, thank you so much, Shane. Thank you, Stephen, for being with us today. Great information. So keep up on those updates through the blogs. And again, let me go back and I'll keep the blogs on the screens and I'll stay on for a little bit and I'll try to post some of these links directly into the chat for some of those of you guys who want to grab them through the chat. But for now, we'll say goodbye to Shane and Stephen. And again, thank you guys so much for joining us. Shane, thanks again for supporting the show, and we will see you guys again pretty soon.
Thank you. Thank you both.
so
Appreciate
much.
it. Thanks, everyone, for attending.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
All right. Now let's see if I can get some of these links posted up for you guys. Just give me a second here.
Hey, Carol, we can also add links to our YouTube on our YouTube channel when we post the recording.
Okay, awesome. That's what we'll do actually, because it'll take me a while to get all these links probably put into the chat here. So let me show you guys again where our YouTube channel is, and I'll go through these housekeeping slides if you guys missed it when you came in or you want those again. So gavology.com/YouTube is where we're going to be posting the video. So we'll also post some of those links that we shared within here. If you want to join our Gavology Nation, that's our private LinkedIn group. You can ask a question there. We also have our experts from today who are in that Gavology Nation group as well. If you want to reach out directly to the Co-Prince McCall Pottroff team, we've shared their info. You guys probably have got their email address already. Again, if you want to contact or reach out to one of your Apex Accelerator centers in your area, again, they work a lot with various small businesses throughout both SAM registration and the various certifications that there are out there. So there's their link there. Also, the blogs that I had referenced earlier, that FedLift Substack, it's substack.com/@FedLift. That's Stephen Coprince's blog, where he's going to continue posting updates about the things that we talked about today. Also, the smallgovcon.com blog is Shane and the Coprince McCall Putroff company blog. It's they've separate of their website. So again, it's a really great place to sign up and subscribe if you want to get updates on what's kind of happening in the world from them directly. And then again, we've shared the link for our GovCon Roundup Live, which is the show that you guys attended to today. And we're going to be getting another show here and getting the next upcoming show posted pretty soon. And I think that's about all the links that I've had for you guys. Again, thank you guys for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you in August when we talk about some specific big changes happening potentially to the 8A program as well as the WOSB programs.